Well, hello. This is Bob Odell from Root Source, and today we are interviewing. Dr. Young, I can hardly find the words to say how much I've been looking forward to interview you, Dr. Brad Young, the translator of the Newer Testament. Welcome to Root Source.
Well, it's such an honor to be here with you, Bob, and just thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to this time of talking with you. We've developed such a close friendship over
a couple of years. And early on in those 2 years, I made a promise to you that I wanted to interview you about this work you were doing on the translation of the New Testament. And lo and behold, it's out. It's available right now. And so this interview, I think maybe the delay was a good thing.
Maybe it was.
Well, the book is the Newer Testament, an English translation which affirms the New Testament's authentic Hebrew heritage. Well, that's an interesting subtitle for a translation to the New Testament. What's this about? Why did you do a book like this?
Well, our goal was to hear as they heard. And when we look at the Hebrew heritage, you're going to find the actual context, reconstruct the context for Jesus' life and ministry. I think how many times as believers, when we're reading the Bible, we're praying, you think, what would it have been like to be one of the original disciples?
Yes.
To sit at Jesus' feet.
Yes.
Maybe to have that cultural orientation.
Yes.
To really understand Jesus in the language that he was speaking in. So this translation begins with the Hebrew scriptures, the Older Testament, if you will, or the Tanakh. And we are using that as the platform. You have to start with the prayers of the Torah to understand the prayers of the Gospels. And so we are learning the faith of Jesus, which will strengthen our faith in Jesus so that we can hear as they heard.
So I think I heard someone say once that there's over 100 translations of the New Testament, the Greek New Testament. And this is not a translation from Hebrew directly. I mean, you start with the Greek manuscripts, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So why one more translation? What is unique here versus the 100 or so that have come before?
Yeah, there are many good translations, and every translation should be evaluated based on the goals. And so here we've set some goals that are different. Most translations have two steps. They start with the Greek, and then they translate it from that first step to the second step into easy to understand English, or maybe for a particular denomination or public reading or private devotions. We have three steps. We start with the Greek canonical text, but then we go to this intermediate step before we go to English, thinking, well, how would this have been understood by a Jewish audience? We know that Jesus probably didn't teach in Greek. He probably taught in Hebrew, maybe sometimes in Aramaic, and he was speaking to a Jewish audience. So today we read it as a Christian audience. And so our goal is to do a Hebrew reconstruction. And we have a Hebrew literal translation, but what we call a functional equivalency. Take, for instance, the word Pharisee. Today, if you look up the word Pharisee in an English dictionary, it'll say hypocrite. That's one of the meanings. Yes. Well, in the first century, the Pharisee had a different meaning. Many times people thought of the Pharisees as spiritual leaders. Maybe just like today where we have spiritual leaders, they may not always live up to the teaching. They may be pretenders sometimes. But you didn't think of hypocrites. So when we say, take a saying of Jesus where he says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, well, people think, oh, those hypocrites, we can do better than that. But we translated the word Pharisee as spiritual leader. So unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the spiritual leaders, well, that helps you hear as a first century audience heard.
As they would have heard it. Okay. Affirms the New Testament's authentic Hebrew heritage. So when you say hear it as they heard it, we're really going back to how they heard it, because they heard it in Hebrew, in a Hebrew environment and a Hebrew culture.
Yeah, so it's, Pharisaioi, you say spiritual leaders. That's a good translation. Okay. And we explain in the notes sometimes where we change this. Another example might even be like good eye. If your eye is good, your body is filled with light. Well,
right,
the word hoplos there is not exact. It's like good, but good eye was a very good Hebrew idiom, which means generosity. So we actually translate it, if your eye is good, showing generosity, or if your eye is bad, uncovering a stingy temperament. So you actually get the meaning.
Okay.
I noticed in the ESV, English Standard Version, which is a good translation, they translated, if your eye is healthy. Well, they're trying to get that Greek word hoplos, which is like agathos, good, healthy, but you totally misunderstand it, because it has nothing to do with the health of your eye. It has to do with a generous spirit. And we can see this in many Hebrew idioms. We can go back to Deuteronomy 15. We can look at Proverbs, where it says a good eye is someone that's very generous.
So we're going to, in this interview, we're going to get into maybe some of the interesting cases that you've talked about. But first, let's just run just a couple of facts about you. First of all, the translation has your name on it. Do I understand then you were the primary translator of the entire, of every book of the New Testament in this?
Yes, when we were looking at this project, I'd actually hoped that it would have other people that would help in the translation. We felt like sometimes Christians misunderstand the Jewish context. Sometimes there's even anti-Jewish sentiments that guide translations, and misunderstandings about the Jewish people in the first century. So we felt there's an urgent need to do this. But as it turned out, I was the one that was translating. I had people I could consult with, and we had a group of people that would interact with us. And I translated it over a 25-year period.
25 years.
And
okay.
But if it's good, you can. I'll say some of these consultants help me. If it's bad, you can look at me. It's a humbling experience to translate.
You're trying to walk that fine line between. You did most of the primary work yourself with consultants, of which I've heard you talk about. You had over a dozen people that were sort of close to the project,
yes.
And consulting and looking at it. And I've heard you talk about you've had over 100 reviewers that were really going through it in a very detailed way. So you're not just alone. But on the other hand, you were you were making the primary decision according with review, but you were just the way it happened.
Yeah, I had some excellent scholarly help in the consultation, proofreading, some of the proofreaders and others. And I talk about a lot of these key people, some of them in the acknowledgments, but I made the decisions. And it's really a one-person translation in some way. So there's strengths and weaknesses in that.
There always
I've worked with Bible Society committees, and there's some great things that happen. And I think when you work with a committee, you also realize, sometimes you don't feel like the committee always goes in the right direction. But this is a companion. You can use this as a translation to compare with your favorite translation and judge it, evaluate it for these goals that we had. How does it help you reconstruct this historical situation in the first century? And I think it'll make your favorite translation more understandable, and you'll enjoy it more. And I think many people are saying this is their primary translation now, and they're really using it in Bible study.
And as I've read this, it certainly breaks you out of the mold of that. There's a certain pattern of the words but this takes you out of that mold, and you have to really hear it. Exactly what you're trying. You have to hear it because it's not using the exact same words, but it doesn't stray. I catch, I love this because it doesn't take me into a different field. It's just a slight different look. Let me ask you, you obviously know Greek and Hebrew. How many languages do you know? I really don't know the answer.
Well, in my doctoral work, I had to do readings in German, so and I used to speak German. I haven't used it very much, but I do use it in reading and research. And of course, we studied a lot of Aramaic and we studied Greek. And but my main language and working in this was Hebrew. But I studied in modern Hebrew at the Hebrew University when I did my doctorate. I actually taught as a lecturer at Hebrew University for a couple of years, so I had to teach in modern Hebrew. And so you have the Mishnaic Hebrew of the Mishnah, you have the Hebrew of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then you have the later biblical Hebrew. And a lot of times that's kind of our issue when we're translating or reconstructing certain sayings, is it's not just to understand the Hebrew, but which Hebrew, what type, what's the language. And the Apostle Paul, he called himself a Hebrew of the Hebrews, but he wrote his letters in Greek, but his thinking, his theology is very Hebraic.
Makes
and
sense.
It's very, Paul is riveted to the Torah. I believe he really loved the Torah, and sadly, many Christians have misunderstood some of the statements that Paul has made about the Torah, taking them out of the total context of his message.
I cannot do an interview without finding out about somebody's origins. You mentioned you taught at Hebrew University. You've obviously, which is in Jerusalem, so you've obviously spent some time in Israel. But I want to go back to the beginning. When you were a kid, did you dream of translating the Bible?
No, I love the Bible. I grew up in Oklahoma. My parents were very active in the Baptist church, and I had a deep faith experience at 12 years old, and I just loved to study the Bible. At 14, actually, I even had a desire to learn Greek, and I had a youth director friend that was taking a Greek course, and so I got the grammar by Machen, and I would study it 30 minutes a day. And then on the weekends when he came in at Saturday, I would take the test he had taken that week, and we would talk about Greek. And so, I was, learning about the Bible at that time.
Wait. How did you have a youth director who wanted to talk about Greek? Where did you meet this guy?
Well, he was at the church, and the church, wanted,
Your church?
biblical foundation. My mother, I've got to thank her as well. She read, I have two brothers, and she read us Bible stories every night. Especially my older brother and I, my oldest brother, we've talked together. And also my middle brother, but my oldest brother, he has 7 kids, and he's talked about how reading the Bible to his children, like my mother read to us. I will say that with my family. But it just has changed our lives. And, that really helped me to start it. Yes.
Your mother reads the Bible to you daily?
Daily.
And from a young age, at age 12, you have an experience with God, a profound experience. And by 14, you want to learn Greek, or you want to?
I wanted to, because there were Bible passages that I didn't understand. I didn't like the explanations. One in particular, which I think is related to this translation project, is how Jesus said, do not think that I've come to destroy the law. And then, it seemed like in the teachings of our church, we were saying, well, the law isn't so important. You're not under law, you're under grace. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed a little contradictory. And it really started coming clear to me when I went to Israel for the first time in 1972. And I began to see this connection between living a life with grace, as many Jewish people do, but also following ethical principles. And
Well, I want to ask about that next. So let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to hear how you got to Israel and what happened when you got there. So until next time, until we continue, this is Bob Odell from Root Source saying shalom.